Hey there, and welcome back to Launch Your Private Podcast. This episode is part of our special Roundup series, where we're exploring 5 powerful ways businesses are using private podcasts to nurture, engage, and convert. Each Roundup features a few past guests sharing their real-world experience around one theme. I asked each of them the same set of questions, and you'll hear their answers back to back. That way, you can catch different perspectives quickly without a ton of backstory. Today's focus, we are using private podcasts to supercharge your launch strategy. Whether you're selling a course, a membership, a coaching program, or anything in between. You'll hear from Holly Haynes, Kendra Hennessy, and Julie Ciardi, 3 brilliant business owners who have all found creative, high-converting ways to weave private podcast into their launch plans. They'll each kick off by introducing themselves and sharing how they're using private podcasts in their launch. And if you want to hear more from today's guests, we've linked to their full solo episodes for you in the show notes. All right, let's hear them.
Hello, my name is Holly Haynes, and I am a business strategist, specifically helping women in business build what I call a life priorities-based business model. So building a really full-time business on a part-time schedule and doing it without relying on the social media algorithm. And so the reason that I am so obsessed with private podcasts is it really allows me to give a sort of insider's view and more of a relationship type model with a one-to-many model. And so we have a private podcast called Ditch the Social Drama, which gives you the 5-part framework of how to build a full-time business on a part-time schedule without using social media. And we have, on the back end of that, launched our signature program, Antisocial School, for the 8th time. We just finished the last launch. So since I have been on the Hello Audio podcast, we've done 2 more launches, I believe, of Antisocial School. And the private podcast is really what fuels it. So that's been really exciting. We also have added private podcasting behind the scenes in all of our programs so that my clients can hear my voice and listen to me. And then I do have a brand new private podcast coming out on a different topic called Launch Lessons. And it's all about the lessons learned about launching that you wish you knew before you built the thing. And there is a program on the back end of it. And the reason why I chose to do a private podcast is because we have just seen such great conversion results. And again, it's such a natural, easy way for me to connect with my clients and future clients. So I am such a huge private podcast fan and super excited to be back.
Hi there, it's Kendra Hennessy, founder of Mother Like a Boss, where I make house cleaning more doable for regular moms and families so they can spend less time tidying their spaces and more time enjoying their homes. The ways that I use private podcasting, to be honest, is so varied. And even just trying to narrow down the exact ways that I use private podcasts was really difficult for me because I use them so often. I don't even know how many feeds I have right now, but it's a lot because I use them both for free content that I use either during a launch or evergreen content as an opt-in. But most importantly, I use it for paid content. And so when I'm launching, one of the main features of a course that I'm launching or even my membership is access to a private podcast. One of the greatest ways that I've been able to use this for launching something paid is in my membership, my Clean It Club membership, where students don't have to get on calls. They can submit questions and then I record the answers asynchronously in a private podcast. This not only helps people to get answers to their own questions, but we know if one person has the question, hundreds of people have the question. And so it's really been such a great way for people to get that personalized one-to-one help without having to put calls on their schedule, which most people just don't have the time for anymore. I find that that is a huge selling point for people. I know that I used to offer calls way back when, before I even had a membership and just had a course. And that was great 10 years ago. But nowadays, people are just busier than ever. And they love being able to have a private podcast that they can listen to anytime. But I also love using them for free content that I put out there as an opt-in. So there's so many different ways to use private podcasts.
Hey there, I'm Julie Ciardi, and I am the founder and CEO of Ignite Her, which is a coaching company helping other coaches to start and scale their businesses using human design. And I am a huge fan of using private podcast, using Hello Audio, but I do it at a very specific strategy with our launching. So we launch quite a few times a year. And we love to use the live launch method. It's part of my human design. I love to be able to go live in a masterclass over a period of about a week. People come in, they get to really learn from me, see what we offer, we make the offer, and they come into our programs. That has been our strategy for 5 years. And something shifted and changed over the last couple of years where people were registering for the free masterclass, but then the numbers weren't the same on the show up rate. And we knew that we wanted people to be much more engaged and binge our content before they came to the masterclass. We wanted them to go from being a stranger to being a curious prospect, really hooked and hungry for more. We wanted them to be so excited and really teed up to want to come to the masterclass where they wouldn't want to miss the masterclass. Most of the people coming in are coming from ads, so they're strangers to us. They don't know me. They don't know what I'm about. They don't know my program. And so when we have them register for the masterclass, immediately on the thank you page and in all the follow-up, we bring them to a private podcast that has been absolutely curated to intentionally so that it tees them up to come to the masterclass, which is incredible. We have now had 4 multiple 6-figure launches from using this strategy, and the private podcast is absolutely the secret sauce to having raving fans coming into your free masterclass when they didn't know who we are to begin with.
Now that you know a little bit about each guest and how they're using private podcast in their launches, let's look at how they decide what content to include to make their audio assets as powerful and engaging as possible.
I get this question a lot in terms of what do you put inside your private podcast and how do you make sure that it leverages and shows what you do and how you do it. And so my first piece of advice is to really think about what the private podcast is leading to. So if you're using it as part of a program, then it's going to be a little bit different than if you're using it as a lead magnet, as an example. And so I'll give the example of if you're using it as a lead magnet, because you want to make sure that the framework that you're teaching in your private podcast is highlighting and gently moving them to the next step. So as an example, most of our private podcasts that we have created are 5 episodes. I like to keep them super short and sweet, like 10 to 15 minute increments, because I feel like they're just super easy to consume. And then each one has a purpose. And so I will sit down and say, okay, the first episode has to talk about like, why are we here and why is it important? And then the second, third, fourth episode gets into the framework that we're actually selling in our program. And so it's a mix of getting to know you, your personality, why you're doing the thing, why it's important to you, which is, what you would talk about on any like coffee chat or date with the person. And then the next step is like inviting them very gently into this next step. So I don't really sell on the private podcast, but I do talk about, hey, I can only cover so much in a short amount of time, but if you're interested in learning more, go here. And so we're talking about the next step that's coming without selling to it. And so that's the framework that's worked really well for me personally. Again, it's a mix of getting to know you, why the thing that you're teaching is important, giving a little bit of education, and then inviting them to that next step.
When I'm using private podcasts for launching either live or evergreen, which for the most part now, all of my stuff is evergreen. I don't do too many live launches anymore. One of the ways that I decide kind of what needs to go into that podcast is what do people need to hear right now and how can I get them the quickest win possible? I think we are coming from the day and age of webinars, these long form webinars from the years past, which I still use evergreen webinars, but they're very short. They're like short and bite size. But coming from that, We are all so busy. Consumers out there, whether it's in B2B or B2C, are smarter now, and they also have more options. And so I like to look at my private podcast as a way to give people bite-sized value and quick wins. What is something very quick that I can give them? How can I get in their ears while they're driving? While, I serve moms, so while they're doing things around their house, while they're on their way to work, how can I give them value and a quick win, something that they can do that day? My mission is always, what is something that someone could do today that would change their day? Because if you can change their day, you can change their life. And so in doing a private podcast, I really would give anyone the advice to think about what your audience most needs to hear, how you can get them a quick win. And then, of course, you're selling a product. What do they need to hear in order to make the purchase? What are objections that you can help them overcome? What are the stories that they're telling themselves about not needing this product, or that it's not going to work for them? Those are the kind of things I always put in a private podcast when I'm doing any kind of launch.
So we're very intentional about how we use the private podcast to warm people up, complete strangers off of ads. How do we warm them up before we do our masterclasses? So we get very intentional about the content that we bring through the private podcast. I typically do about 5 or 6 curated, intentional episodes so that I'm walking them through some really key things. I always think about, what does a stranger need to know, believe, see before they will make the commitment of even coming to the next free thing, which is our masterclass. And so, of course, I'm going to have content that's going to talk about who I am and my background and my expertise and my story, so they begin to know who I am and my why. I then am also making sure that I go deep on some concepts, ideas, and frameworks that I would love for them to know ahead of coming into the masterclass. If they can come into my free masterclass before they buy and decide to buy into my program, I want them to come in with some baseline knowledge of, for me, it's human design. So I want them to understand some pretty cool concepts in human design well ahead of them coming into the masterclass. So I also use it to get them up to speed, if you will, on what I'm about to teach. I also actually go through what we're going to do in the masterclass. So I go through the agenda and really hype it up because I want them to be excited about the masterclass. And in our universal footer of all of the episodes, we have the exact steps we want to make sure that they're taking to show up for the masterclass. So we include the ad event link. We include our Facebook group link. We include our email, and we literally ask them to email us if they want the workbook, right? We want to be able to have them actually even come off of the private podcast and into conversation with us. And it's really, really powerful. I also want them to hear from either past clients, hear from other people that are talking about what we do. We really curate the content so that when someone's coming into the masterclass, they really are primed and ready to work with us, which is so incredibly powerful.
All right. We know how they design their private podcast episodes, but how do they actually get people to listen and take action? Let's talk about their marketing strategies.
I absolutely love marketing with a private podcast because I feel like it is so much easier. Like, I would so much rather use a private podcast than write like a 75-page Canva deck. And so what we have done so far is, one, use a pre-launch period to talk about the private podcast. So I treat a private podcast, even if it's free or paid, just like a normal product. And we will dedicate 2 to 3 weeks to talking just about the podcast. And then I will talk about it externally as well on other podcasts, in groups, in all the different places I can, talk about why you should go listen to this private podcast. So we usually do this for 2 or 3 weeks prior to our launch. And then you can pick your path. Sometimes that is enough to get enough people in your funnel behind the scenes to get them to take the next step and purchase whatever you're selling. I should mention that in the original episode that I was in, talking about how we use private podcasts, the key for us is that we've got an email funnel on the back end of each episode of the podcast. This last launch, what we did is we had a pre-launch period where we talked about the private podcast. We added a bonus episode. So if you had listened to the podcast before, now you have a bonus episode. You go back and listen to it. And then that reintroduces our current clients to the podcast again. And then we tacked on hey, I'm going to actually teach the private podcast live. So our private podcast was called Ditch the Social Drama. We promoted it for 2 to 3 weeks. Then I taught Ditch the Social Drama live, and then we launched Anti-Social School. And so it was a really cool way to introduce everyone to our framework and then move into, hey, I'm going to teach it again in a different way where you can show up live. And they already knew me and they already knew what I was going to teach. And we had really great conversion results from that workshop.
I am big on using social media for marketing. That's something that I've been doing for years. And so anything that I'm using a private podcast for, again, whether it's free or part of a paid program that I'm marketing, I use social media. So I'm on Instagram at Mother Like a Boss. I'm on TikTok. I have a much bigger following on TikTok. So that's helpful. And it's just at the Mother Like a Boss. And that's really where I do most of my promotion. I don't do ads anymore. I don't do that kind of stuff. And I just find that it's a really great segue because if somebody is watching me on social media, they're watching bite-sized content. They're watching short form video. And so a private podcast is a great next step. Instead of it being a long video, it's like, hey, you're watching this 90-second to 3-minute video and you really enjoy that. What you also might enjoy is this great podcast. I will say I don't always call it a private podcast. Sometimes I say just an audio series or an audio experience because private podcasts can sometimes be confusing to some people. And so I just call it that. But it's a great next step for them. If they're already on social media, they're already consuming that short form content. Most of my private podcasts, when they are free, are short, 10 minutes or less. So it's a great next step for them. And then if it is a part of a paid program, it's a great selling point that I can talk about on social media where I can say, hey, and if you're joining my course or you're buying my guide, then you have access to this great audio series that goes with it.
So in terms of marketing, we aren't really marketing the private podcast directly. We're marketing our free masterclass. But what we do, and this is really exciting, we get them to sign up for the free masterclass. And then we actually do retargeting ads to promote the private podcast to those that already registered. So when someone registers for our masterclass during launch, we want to make sure, one, that they really get in and binge this podcast. Because we know if they binge that podcast, they are more likely to show up on day one. They're also more likely to buy. So what we do is we do retargeting ads to the private podcast. So these are people that have already registered. They've already taken that step. And these retargeting ads are awesome. They are not expensive. And we're able to get them to that next step. We even use retargeting ads on specific episodes of the private podcast as well. So it's really exciting. It's something that we have been doing in the last couple of launches. And it is absolutely helping to, again, get them to the private podcast, to then get them to make the decision. People are busy. People have a lot going on. I have to earn their trust that spending their time coming to a free masterclass with me is going to not only be worth it, but it's going to be better than something that they paid for. And so I want them to really have that submersion experience with me. We know that audio builds trust. We are in a trust recession, right? So people don't trust people right now, and those people are getting kind of bored and onto the funnels and the FOMO and the scarcity and all the things. We have to earn their trust. And audio is the fastest path to earning trust from someone. And so retargeting to get them to listen to the podcast is such a way to guarantee that that trust is building before they ever step foot in the virtual room of our masterclass. So the other thing that we do is once we're in masterclass mode and launch mode, what we do is, again, the private podcast was used to warm people up to come into the masterclass. But then I go back to it once I've opened cart. So once I've opened cart to the offer that we are presenting, then I actually do an audio walkthrough of the sales page. So it's really going deeper, and I'm hearing my voice and making the sales pitch to them using the private podcast. And so it's great because after day 4 is typically when I open cart. Well, that's all. I open up a new episode, drop a new episode into the private podcast feed. And now they're hearing in my voice, they're seeing it come through their podcast player, which they're already there. And it's so effective. It's so effective. In terms of things that I have seen not work as well is not being really, really intentional about the journey that you're bringing people through in the private podcast. And it's really about taking someone from being a stranger to a curious prospect to an interested buyer to a raving fan. And so leveraging your private podcast to be able to bring them to the next step. What do they need to hear, believe, or see? What can you share with them is so incredibly powerful. So another thing that we do to help the buying portion of using the private podcast is we actually also do live client panels where I'm interviewing our clients on why did they choose to join the Human Design Business Accelerator, what's happening behind the paywall, so that they can really share what the experience is like on the inside. And then we take that audio and we put that audio on the private podcast, and they get that at the perfect timing during our launch, because now they can go and listen in. They've heard about the program. They know all about it. They've spent time with us. They've now had a ton of time listening to our content. And then we drop the client panel and they love it. It helps them to realize, is this for me or not? And they love to hear from other women that are already inside the program. So that is a big do. Bring client testimonials into your private podcast.
So many good ideas for driving listeners and building trust. Now it's time to hear how these business owners are planning to expand and evolve their use of private podcasts even further. And they might even offer a little bit of advice.
In terms of do's or don'ts for a private podcast, I think there are so many different ways that you can use it. I think it's just really important to slow down to speed up and really think about what is the purpose of me using this platform for this scenario, right? So I have all different ways that I use private podcasts, but am I using it as a nurture? Am I using it as a conversion? Am I using it as part of my program? Is it paid? Is it free? And so I think really mapping that out at the beginning is going to help you figure out what you should actually cover in the private podcast. And then I would say make it your own, because it's becoming more and more popular to have a private podcast, which I love because I think people crave that human connection. But make it your own. Make your personality shine through. Talk the way you normally would talk. Share the things that you normally would share. I personally prefer shorter, bingeable episodes where I can just get through it quickly. I think those perform better. And then don't give away the farm, especially if it's free. So if it's a paid podcast, 100% give away what you say you're going to give away. But if it's a free podcast, I think it's really important to balance them getting to know you, balance giving the framework of what you're teaching, why that's important. Give a little bit, but if they want to take the next step, then you need to walk them through what that next step is. So those are some of the things that I've learned along the way. Looking ahead, I'm really excited for our new private podcast to launch called Launch Lessons. This would be the second free private podcast that I have in my product suite. And again, the reason why we chose a private podcast to serve our audience is because it's done so well. People have responded to it so well, and it just feels easy and fun and light, and it's something that we just need in this current economy that we're in. And then there's a program on the back end of it. And then I'm continuing to use private podcasts behind the scenes in all of our programs. And so really thinking through different ways that I can use audio feeds to deliver content for paid programs as well. One of my favorite things that I have seen is people taking their weekly newsletters and moving it into a private podcast feed. That's something I've considered. We haven't done it yet, but I just think there's so many cool ways. And so going back to the question before, I think just use it and be creative and think of all the different things that you can do with your voice and how powerful it is for people to hear that. So I hope that inspires you to try private podcasting. I think there's no right or wrong way. And it's definitely a tool that people are latching onto.
If I could share my biggest piece of advice for creating a private podcast for a launch, especially, it's less is more. I think that we all, especially as business owners, content creators, we want to help. And we can get really in our heads about needing to give more value. This happened during webinars and even in courses where people are giving so much and they don't realize that that's actually more overwhelming. It's not helpful. It actually becomes a hindrance to sales and to the overall experience of your student or your follower or the person opting in for this. I'm a big fan of less is more. A huge do for me when it comes to creating a private podcast, again, is that bite-sized content. For my audience, it tends to be 10 minutes and under. For other audiences, it might be a little bit longer, especially if you have to explain things more. So I always say, make sure that your content is not too overwhelming, that you're not overdoing it, that less is more. And then from a technical standpoint, just ensuring that people can hear you. We have so many great options nowadays for microphones that are so inexpensive and affordable compared to what they used to be, but just making sure that you can be heard. And that also, my other piece of advice that just came to me, don't over edit. I feel that way about public podcasts too. We're in the day and age where people want to feel like the person talking to them is a real person. I want to listen to a human. I don't want to listen to an over edited version of a person that sounds like AI. Maybe you want to edit out, little things or big chunks of something that you didn't mean to be in there, but be a real person on your podcast. Somebody is listening to you for a reason and they want to get to know you and they want to buy from somebody who's real.
I really believe that the more that we can think about using audio at each stage of the buyer's journey, we are going to win. This is for all of us, right? We are going to win because audio is the advantage. Audio is the fast pass to building trust in the era that we're in. And the sound of our voice is a frequency. I always say it's like our unique dog whistle that we can blow and our people can hear it. It is so much more effective. We know that 93% of communication is nonverbal. So it's nonverbal and it's the tone of your voice and the frequency of your voice and what they're hearing in the confidence and the clarity coming through your voice. It's so much deeper than the written word. And so we're going to be using audio in everything that we do. We also use private podcasts in our delivery with our clients. I have one every single day. It's called the Daily Frequency. And we're going to continue to evolve that strategy as well. So really thinking about private podcasts way beyond marketing and sales and thinking about how you actually elevate the client experience by bringing private podcasting into your clients, memberships, courses, things like that. It's amazing.
All right, there you have it. I hope this gave you tons of ideas for how you can weave private podcasts into your own launch event, whether you're doing a live launch, an evergreen offer, or something totally unique that we haven't heard of yet. If you want to hear more from today's guests, their full solo episodes are linked for you in the show notes. And if you create or update your own private podcast after listening to this, let us know. We'd love to hear how you're using it. And remember, this was all part of our private podcast Roundup series. Be sure to catch all the episodes if you haven't yet, and that will hopefully get you inspired by all the creative ways you can put private feeds to work in your business. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you in the next episode.